The alert hit before I could breathe. Not a gradual warning, not a slow build. Of sensor chatter, one moment we were in the dark tunnel of faster, then light travel, and the next, every screen on the bridge of the unconquered sun exploded into red. I was already in my chair when the FTL drive coughed, shuddered, and died mid-jump. We dropped into normal space like a stone thrown into water, and the shock wave knocked half my crew off their feet. I am Commander Yara Oe. I have been flying survey vessels for 11 years. I have charted dead moons, mapped gas giants, navigated debris fields that would make most pilots quit on the spot. I have never felt my ship shake the way she shook in that moment, and I have never seen my navigation officer go pale that fast. Where are we? I asked. Callum Fraser, my navigator, 29 years old, best spatial instincts I had ever seen, stared at his screen with his mouth slightly open. He did not answer immediately, which told me everything I needed to know. When Callum did not answer immediately, it meant the answer was something he did not want to say out loud. Callum, we are approximately 41 light years from the planned jump exit. Commander, he paused. The nav computer is still calculating. There was a cascade failure in the drive coil during transit. It redirected our jump vector. We came out. He stopped again, swallowed, and said, we came out somewhere we were not supposed to go. The unconquered sun was a survey and science vessel. She was 480 m of reinforced hull, sensor arrays, laboratory modules, and a crew of 61 people who had signed up to explore empty space, map things no one had mapped before, and come home safely. She had rail guns designed to push asteroids off collision courses. She had a point defense grid designed to handle debris at high velocity. She was not designed for anything else. Talk to me, Priya, I said. Chief Engineer Priya Malhotra's voice came through the intercom from Deck 3, tight and controlled. She sounded the way she always sounded when something had gone wrong with her engines, like a person who loved something very much and had just watched it get hurt. Drive coil 3 is gone. Coil 2 is damaged. We are not going anywhere at FTL speed for at least 30 hours. Commander, I need time to assess the full picture. You have it, I said. Shields up, full passive scan all stations. That was when Ezra Voss, my chief intelligence and xenolinguistics officer, the quietest and arguably the most dangerous mind on the ship, looked up from his station and said very calmly, Commander, we have contacts. I turned to the main view screen. There were 47 of them, 47 alien warships, arranged in a formation I had never seen in any tactical textbook. They were not randomly placed. They were in 3 distinct groups, each group holding a wedge-shaped position around a gravitational midpoint in space, and that midpoint was now, by pure accident, exactly where the unconquered sun had dropped out of FTL. The ships were enormous. Some of them were twice the length of our vessel, some were triple. They had weapons ports open. They had targeting systems active. I could see it all on the sensor readout, plain as day. They had been here before we arrived. They were facing each other, not us. We had landed in the middle of something. Active scan returned, said Specialist Owen Brady from the sensor station, his voice absolutely steady in the way that only happens when a person has decided not to panic. 47 vessels, 3 distinct configuration profiles, none of them match anything in our contact database. None of them are human, I breathed. 61 people on this ship, 61 people who had eaten breakfast this morning and argued about the coffee supply and filed maintenance reports and expected to be home within the year. 61 people whose lives were sitting in the middle of 47 alien warships that had been pointing weapons at each other when we interrupted them. Open a channel, I said. Standard first contact package. All 112 languages, full greeting array. The Unconquered Sun's first contact suite had been designed by a committee of linguists, xenobiologists, mathematicians, and communications specialists over a period of 15 years. It was the best thing humanity had ever built for saying hello to something it had never met. The package included mathematical primers, physical constants, a map of our solar system, audio and visual representations of human biology, and greetings in every language humanity had ever spoken. It was thorough, beautiful, and deeply optimistic. I sent it and waited 2 minutes of silence, then a voice. It did not come from speakers, it came from everywhere, a full spectrum broadcast that hit the hull of the ship itself, resonating in the metal, translated in real time by our contact suite into something resembling English. The translation was rough the way all first past translations are rough, but the meaning was not ambiguous. Species unregistered, jurisdiction contested. You will stand down or be destroyed. The bridge was completely quiet. I looked at Ezra. He was already recording, pulling apart the signal, his fingers moving across his console in the fast, precise way. That meant his brain was running 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Stand down means what exactly? I asked him. Possibly surrender, possibly retreat, possibly both. He did not look up. Transmission originated from the Central Group, the largest ships. Based on the geometry, they appear to be the dominant faction of the 3. I leaned forward. Can we retreat? Priya nodded. FTL, she said from the intercom. We could move at sublight, slowly, about as fast as a cargo freighter on a bad day, so we cannot run. No, Commander. Can we fight 47 ships? Silence. Nobody answered that question, which was also an answer. I sat back in my chair and thought for exactly 6 seconds. I have been told that under pressure I become very still. I think it is because when there is no good option on the table, the only thing that helps is making sure you understand every bad one completely before you choose between them. I could stand down. I did not know what that meant, and I did not trust that it ended well for 61 people on a ship that these civilizations had never heard of. I could fight. I had rail guns and a point defense grid and the creativity of my chief engineer against 47 warships. That was a consideration for about half a second before I said it aside, or I could refuse both. Open a channel, I said, targeted the Central Group. I want voice channel open, said Owen. I spoke. I did not shout. I did not make demands. As I said in a clear, steady voice, this is Commander Yara OE of the Earth Survey Vessel Unconquered Sun. We arrived at these coordinates by navigational error. We mean no threat to any party in this system. We are a survey vessel, not a military asset. I am requesting to speak with whoever is in command here at their earliest convenience. I closed the channel. 47 alien warships held their position. Did it work? Callum asked quietly. I have no idea, I said. But they haven't fired, that's something. The alert board was still red, every sensor was still screaming. Priya was still in the engine room doing something complicated with her hands and a great deal of personal willpower. Ezra was bent over his console, pulling signal apart like a man unraveling a knot. I stayed in my chair and waited. That is the part they never tell you about command, not the decisions, not the courage, the waiting, the sitting absolutely still while 61 people looked to you for a signal that everything is going to be fine, knowing you cannot promise them that, knowing that the only honest thing you can offer them is your own refusal to be anything other than steady. I was steady. The unconquered sun held position at the center of 47 alien ships in a star system 41 light years from where we were supposed to be, with a broken drive and a first contact suite that had been designed for a moment nothing like this one, and I waited for someone to answer. The 18 hours that followed were the quietest of my career and the most terrifying. The alien ships did not fire, they did not respond, not immediately. They held their formation with the kind of disciplined stillness that spoke of long habit of civilizations that had been doing this, standing on the edge of conflict, holding their positions, watching each other for a very long time. I watched them on the view screen and thought about patience. I thought about how old you had to be as a species to develop that kind of patience. I gave Ezra Vass everything the unconquered sun had. He is not an easy person to describe. He is 37 years old, dark-haired, perpetually underdressed for the bridge, and that he never quite managed to get his uniform collar right. And he has the kind of mind that processes language the way other people breathe, constantly, automatically, without apparent effort. He had trained as a linguist first, then as an intelligence analyst, then as a xenobiologist, because one field had never been enough to hold him. He had published work on 17 constructed alien communication models before we left Earth, all theoretical, all built around the idea that we might one day actually meet someone. This was that day. He did not sleep. He sat at his station for 18 consecutive hours with 2 cups of cold coffee going stale beside him, and he pulled apart every signal the 3 alien factions had been broadcasting. Since before we arrived, they had not stopped broadcasting just because we were there. If anything, our arrival had increased the signal traffic between all 3 groups. They were talking about us. He was listening. I sat with him for part of it. I am not a linguist. I watched the patterns on his screen, the waveforms and frequency graphs and symbol clusters that meant nothing to me, and I watched his face instead. Because his face told me more. He had 3 expressions: neutral focus, which was his resting state; sharp focus, which meant he had found something; and a third expression I had only seen once before on a mission 3 years ago when we had discovered a derelict alien probe of unknown origin in the outer belt of a map system. That third expression was what I had started thinking of privately as the O expression. It meant he had found something he had not expected to find, something that changed the shape of everything else. At the 14-hour mark, he made that face. I was across the bridge in 4 steps. What? Give me a moment, Ezra. 1 moment, Commander. His hands were moving very fast. He pulled up 3 separate files, cross-referenced them against something in the deep archive, and then sat back in his chair and looked at the screen, without speaking for a full 10 seconds. I waited. The central group, he said at last, the faction that broadcast the warning, they are called the Shivari. Compact, at least that is the closest phonetic approximation our translator can produce. They are the dominant military and territorial power in this region. They have been in control of this border zone for approximately 200 years. He paused. Before that, this zone was contested for over 3,000 years. 3,000 years, I said. Roughly, yes. Now, the second group, the smaller ships, the ones holding the southern position, I believe they are called the Octet. Their signal structure is unlike anything I have encountered. It is not sequential. It operates in at least 4 simultaneous frequencies, and some of what they are transmitting appears to exist in a range we can detect but not fully decode. They are very old. Commander, I mean that seriously. The pattern complexity in their oldest transmission suggests a civilization that has been spacefaring for tens of thousands of years. And the third faction, the ones on the eastern edge, the 3 assembly, his tone shifted slightly, became almost dry. They appear to be extremely organized and extremely unhappy about the disruption to their schedule. I believe they had a formal mediation process underway before we arrived, and we interrupted it, so we walked into a 3-way border dispute. I said, yes, a 3-way border dispute that has been going on for a very, very long time. He turned to face me. But that is not what I need to tell you. Something in his voice made me pull up a chair and sit down. What do you need to tell me? He turned back to his screen and opened a file that appeared to be a fragment of old signal data, ancient by the look of its header timestamps. 16 hours into my analysis, I started working backwards through the Velocated's archive transmissions. They do not erase old signal records. Their broadcasts carry the entire history of their communications in layered subcarrier frequencies. It is like reading a book, where all the pages are printed on top of each other, but you can separate them by wavelength. He highlighted a specific section. This fragment is approximately 4,000 years old. I looked at the screen, at the symbols, at the numerical timestamp 4,000 years. I found a designation in it, one that does not belong to any of the 3 factions. Designation used once and then never again in any transmission I can find. He translated it on screen, and the translation suite gave him the closest English equivalent, the quiet ones. The Veloctet had a name for a 4th species, a species that was once present in this region of space, species that interacted with all 3 factions at some point in the deep past. He looked at me and then went silent. I stared at the screen. Ezra, I said slowly, tell me what you're about to say. Navigational coordinates encoded in the oldest octet reference to the quiet ones, he said, match the location of our solar system within a margin of error consistent with 4,000-year-old mapping technology. The bridge was very quiet. We are the quiet ones, I said, or we are their descendants. Yes, humanity was here, Commander, not recently, not within recorded history, but we were here, something our ancestors did in a time before anything we know left a mark deep enough that the oldest civilization in this region of space kept the record. He folded his hands on his console, and that mark is tied to this border dispute. The 3 factions are not simply arguing over territory. They are arguing over something that was left here by the species that went silent, something they believe the quiet ones left behind. I stood up, I walked to the view screen and looked at the 47 ships, arranged in their ancient careful formation, and I thought about the weight of 4,000 years pressing down on a moment that had started as a navigation accident. Does the Shivari Compact know? I asked. Do they know what we are? No. None of them do. We are unregistered. Whatever records existed of the quiet ones were kept by the Veloctid and apparently not shared to the Shivari and the THR. We are an unknown vessel from an unknown species that arrived at a politically sensitive moment. He paused. The Shivari are not treating us as a threat exactly. They are treating us as an inconvenience they intend to manage. And the Veloctet, he was quiet. For a moment, the Veloctet have not transmitted anything directed at us, but they have transmitted a great deal internally since we arrived. I have been working on the translation. It is difficult because their language does not work the way ours does. He looked at his screen again. The closest approximation I can give you for what the Velot have been transmitting to each other since the moment we dropped out of FTL is this. He read it aloud. Carefully it returns. The hair on my arm stood up. You said you needed to tell me everything our ancestors did. I said yes, so tell me. He took a breath and began. And what Ezra had found buried in layers of ancient signal was not a complete picture. It was fragments, pieces of ore that 4,000 years of transmission, decay, and incomplete translation had turned into something resembling a puzzle with most of its pieces still missing, but the shape of it was clear enough. Humanity, or something that had become humanity through 40 centuries of forgetting, had once been out here. They had been present in this region of space. They had interacted with the Shivari, the Veloctet, and the THR, and at some point they had placed something in this system, something significant enough that all three factions had been willing to position warships in contested space for 2 centuries to keep the others from claiming it, and then they had gone home, not been destroyed, not been conquered. They had left deliberately, turned their backs on the stars, and gone home to a small blue planet they had apparently decided was more important than everything else. Nobody knew why. The Shivari believed the quiet ones had left a weapon, something powerful enough to tip the balance between the three factions permanently in favor of whoever found it first. They had been hunting for it for as long as the Veloctet had been guarding it. The Veloctet believed something entirely different. Ezra was still working on the nuances of their belief, but the core of it seemed to be that the quiet ones had not abandoned the galaxy. They had simply been waiting, patient beyond patience, waiting until the moment was right to return. The Threen assembly, as near as Ezra could determine, simply wanted compensation for the disruption to their shipping lanes that 200 years of border conflict had caused. So we are the cause, I said quietly. Whatever our ancestors left here, whether it's a weapon or a library or something we can't even name, it's the thing 3 civilizations have been fighting over. We started this war, just not recently. Technically, Ezra said the war started because the quiet ones left without explaining themselves. Whatever they left behind, the ambiguity was the trigger. If they had said, this is what This is why we're leaving. There might not have been a conflict. At all helpful, I said. I'm trying to be. I stood at the view screen and thought 47 ships, 3 factions, a 4,000-year-old argument, a 61-person survey crew in the middle of it, and the Chavari Compact who had told us to stand down or be destroyed had just begun, moving their forward escort group 1 degree closer to our position, not an attack, not yet, something more deliberate, a slow mechanical closing of distance that said very clearly, we are running out of patience with your silence, and we intend to encourage you to make a decision. Turn to Ezra. Tell me everything, I said. Whatever you have, whatever you're still working on. All of it, because in about 48 hours, I am going to need to walk into something. That might be a negotiation or might be a disaster, and I need to understand what we're actually standing in the middle of. He nodded and turned back to his console. I went back to my chair, 41 light years from home, with a broken drive and a crew of 61 people who deserved better than the situation I was sitting in. I thought about the quiet ones. I thought about ancestors who had looked at all of this ancient, complicated, dangerous universe and had chosen to go home and be small. I wondered what they had known that I did not, and I wondered not for the last time whether coming back had been a mistake. The ship trembled for the 3rd time in 6 hours, and I was already on my feet before the sound finished echoing. Not a weapon impact. Something subtler than that. The Chavari Compact had shifted their forward position again, and the gravitation distortion from their drives at close range was enough to push against our hull. It was a message written in physics rather than words. It said, we are patient, but patience is not infinite. My name is Priya Malhotra, and I am the chief engineer of the Unconquered Sun, and I need to tell you something that the official reports will likely soften considerably. I was afraid. Not the kind of afraid that freezes a person, the functional kind, the kind that sits behind your ribs and sharpens everything, makes you precise and fast, and very, very focused on the problem. Directly in front of you, the problem. Directly in front of me was a broken ship. Drive coil 3 was completely destroyed. I had seen drive coil failures before, but always incremental. Always with warning. This one had gone all at once, in transit the way a bone breaks rather than bends. The damage to coil 2 was severe but potentially repairable within 12 to 14 hours if I worked without stopping, and everything went right. Coil 1 was intact but stressed. If I could restore coil 2 to at least 60% function, we could attempt a short FTL jump, not far, maybe 2 light years at best, but far enough to put distance between ourselves and 47 ships that did not know what to do with us. But 12 hours was a long time when the Chavari Compact was moving forward, 1 careful degree at a time. The commander had come down to the engine room at hour 2. She had stood in the doorway, looked at the state of things, and said exactly 3 words, "What do we have?" I respected her for that. No speeches, no pressure wrapped in encouragement, just what do we have? It was the right question. We have 1 functional drive coil, 1 salvageable coil, 1 that is beyond help, and a point defense grid that is currently the most impressive thing on the ship. I said the rail guns are operational. The sensor array is fully functional. The electromagnetic emitter for the survey. Suite is running perfectly, which is unfortunate because a perfect survey emitter is not useful in a standoff with 47 warships. She looked at the emitter housing. She had a way of looking at things that was different from most people, not just seeing the object, but seeing what it could be, what it was connected to, what it might do under different conditions. I had noticed it before. I noticed it again now. What does the survey emitter do exactly? She asked. It generates a wideband electromagnetic pulse, I said, calibrated for deep scan penetration of planetary bodies and dense asteroid fields. It is designed to go through things rather than reflect off them. Untuned, what do you mean? If we ran it without calibration at full power, what would it do? I thought about that for a moment. An uncalibrated full power sweep from the survey emitter would be a wide, dirty burst of electromagnetic energy across multiple frequencies. It would not be targeted. It would not be precise. It would not be anything resembling a weapon, but it would, without question, have consequences for electronic systems that were not shielded against broad-spectrum interference. It would disrupt targeting systems, I said slowly, sensors, communication arrays that were not hardened against M interference, not permanently. They would reboot, but there would be a window. I ran the numbers in my head. About 90 seconds. Maybe a little more. Commander Oy looked at me and said nothing. That is not a weapon, I said. No, she agreed. It is a navigation emergency during which our survey equipment malfunctioned and produced an unintentional electromagnetic discharge, a regrettable accident. I looked at her for a long moment. I am going to need access to the emitter's power regulator, I said. In about 3 hours you have them. She left. I went to work. What I built in those 3 hours was not a weapon. I want to be very clear about that because I have gone over it many times in my own mind, and I am comfortable with the conclusion. What I built was an option, a narrow window of disruption that could be opened once for a very short time if the commander decided. We had no other choice. The rest of the time I spent on Coil 2. I worked on both things in parallel, the way you sometimes have to when every hour carries a cost. At hour 8, I tested the emitter modification on the Shivarri's forward escort, 1 ship. A short low-power pulse, a fraction of what the full system could produce. Carefully aimed, the effect was visible on our sensors immediately. The escort's targeting array went dark for 11 seconds. Before it rebooted, nobody aboard that ship was hurt. Nothing was damaged, but the targeting system went dark, and that was enough to confirm that the theory worked. The escort immediately changed its course, not toward us, sideways, repositioning uncertain, like a person who hears a strange sound and stops to look around. The Shivarri opened a communication channel. I reported this to the commander and stood by while Ezra translated. The communication was not a greeting, it was more like a question. Short, sharp, urgent, the kind of thing you say when something unexpected has happened and you need to know if it was deliberate. Ezra's translation was approximate but honest. What was that? The commander did not answer. She closed the channel. What are you doing? I asked. Through the intercom. Thinking, she said. What she was thinking, I found out later, was about geometry. I am not a tactician. I understand physics and engineering and the way machines relate to each other. The commander understood. Something harder to name, the way forces relate to each other. She looked at the layout of 47 ships in 3 factions around a central point, and she saw something I had not seen. The 3 factions could not fire on us without risk of hitting each other. The geometry of their formation, the wedge-shaped positions they had been holding for years, created overlapping lines of engagement at the center. The Shivari could shoot through the middle, but the middle was also where the Veloctets nearest ships were positioned. The Veloctet could engage, but their fire arcs crossed the Threens formation. Everyone could hit everyone, which meant, under the logic of ancient careful deterrence, nobody fired at anything. We were at the center of that geometry. We had arrived there by accident, but we were there, and we could move to make ourselves even more impossible to touch. I ran the math when she explained it to me. It was genuinely elegant, and I say that as a person who does not use the word elegant about anything except engine design and the occasional very good solution to a problem nobody expected to solve. If we move the unconquered sun to the exact gravitational midpoint of the 3 faction formation, the dead center, the place where no faction had ever positioned a ship because it was too exposed, too contested, too surrounded, we would be simultaneously surrounded by all 3 factions and impossible for any of them to engage without triggering a response from the other 2. It was not a safe position. It was the opposite of a safe position. It was the most dangerous piece of empty space in the entire system. It was also, the commander had decided, the only place we could stand. I need coil 2, she said. Not full function, just enough to move us 300 km on a precise heading. You will have it in 4 hours, I said. I need it in 2. I went back to coil 2 2 hours, and 17 minutes later, I called the bridge and told them we had power, not clean power, not the kind of power I would have been comfortable with under any other circumstances, but enough 60% efficiency, which was precisely enough to move us where the commander needed to go, and if everything worked in our favor and nothing else broke, probably enough for a short FTL jump afterward. Priya, the commander, said, stand by on the emitter. Standing by, we moved. The Shivari Compact reacted immediately. Their forward escort group began repositioning drives, firing the space between us, filling with energy signatures. At full tactical power, they could cross the distance to us in under 4 minutes. Amr, the commander, said. I fired full power, wideband uncalibrated, the survey emitter of the Earth survey vessel Unconquered Sun discharged a broad electromagnetic pulse across the entire Shivari forward formation with approximately the restraint of a thunderstorm. Targeting systems across 11 ships went dark simultaneously. Communication arrays flickered, sensor suites rebooted. 90 seconds. We moved through that window of silence at every meter of thrust I could give the sublight drives, and we slid into the gravitational center of the 3 faction formation like a coin dropped into the exact middle of 3 magnets. When the Shivari systems came back online, we were already there, already at the center, already surrounded by everyone belonging to no one's engagement arc. The 3 assembly opened a communication channel, given Ezra's earlier assessment of them as primarily a bureaucratic civilization, inconvenienced by centuries of border Conflict I had a fairly clear idea of. What they were going to say. Commander accepted the hail. The translation came through. The voice was sharp, rapid, and carried the unmistakable quality of barely contained professional indignation. You have positioned yourself in the restricted median zone without authorization. This is a violation of the three-party interim boundary agreement of a number came through that our translation suite rendered as a date roughly 200 years in the past. You will identify your authorization or vacate the zone. Immediately, the commander looked at the screen. She said very calmly, I do not have authorization. I am requesting it. My name is Commander Yaros. I represent the Earth Survey vessel Unconquered Sun and the species that built and crewed her. I would like to speak with representatives of all three parties simultaneously. I believe we have matters of mutual significance to discuss. Silence. Then the three response came, you are unregistered. You have no standing to request a multi-party dialogue. I understand, the commander said, and I am requesting it anyway. Another silence this time then. From a second channel, not the Thrine, not the Shavari, a signal came in the octet. No words, not at first, just a frequency, a pattern, something that Ezra caught and translated in a low, careful voice. They have returned. I stood in the engine room with my hands on a repaired drive coil and listened to the sound of the universe shifting slightly on its axis. The Shavari compact went quiet. The Thrine assembly went quiet. The octet broadcast their three-word signal twice more, and then they responded to the commander's request, not in the sharp hostile tone of the Shavari or the clipped precision of the THR, in something that took Ezra 30 seconds to translate, because he kept stopping and going back, checking and rechecking, unable to believe that rendering was accurate. We have been waiting, the octet said. Come and speak. I sat down on the engine room floor, which is not a thing I do. I sat down and I let myself breathe. We had moved a broken ship 300 km on 2 hours of work and 61% drive function, discharged a survey emitter in a way it was absolutely not designed to be discharged, and placed ourselves in a position that no tactical logic could have recommended, and somehow, impossibly, it had worked. The commander's voice came over the intercom. Good work, Priya. Don't thank me yet, I said. We still have to get out of here, one problem at a time. Yes, I said, one problem at a time. I sat down at a table that was not designed for human bodies, in a room that was not designed for human comfort, and I prepared to do the one thing I had not been trained for and had no right to attempt. My name is Commander Yara Oe, and I was about to try to negotiate a 4,000-year-old war to close with no authority, no backup, and no plan beyond telling the truth and hoping it was enough. The meeting had taken 3 days to arrange, 3 days of careful, exhausting communication, of Ezra working himself to the edge of functioning, of position papers traded in signal bursts and procedural objections filed in alien bureaucratic formats that took hours to decode. 3 Assembly had submitted 17 formal complaints about the meeting conditions before the first session even began. The Shavari Compact had insisted on a weapons verification protocol that applied to everyone in the room except, notably themselves. The Vel Octet had simply transmitted that they would be present, and that had been the entirety of their response to every procedural question. The meeting room was neutral. Space, a volume of emptiness in the contested zone, each faction's delegation having arrived by shuttle and docked to a platform the three had apparently been maintaining in this system for decades, a piece of infrastructure built for exactly this kind of negotiation and never yet used. It was practical and slightly dusty and felt like a room that had been waiting a very long time for something to happen. In it, I was the only human there. I had brought Ezra. He sat beside me, quiet and focused, with the translation apparatuses that he had spent the previous 2 days modifying, and that he was not fully confident worked correctly in real time. For all 3 species, he had been very honest with me about that. I had said that was fine, that we would manage, and he had given me the particular look he gives me when he is deciding whether I am brave or uninformed, and has concluded it is probably a mixture. The Shivari delegation was 3 individuals. They were tall, angular, with a physical presence that communicated authority the way a mountain communicates authority, by existing large and unyielding and expecting you to account for it. Their lead delegate spoke first before the session had formally opened, which I noted as a dominance gesture, and file away the unregistered vessel, explain its presence and its action against Shivari targeting systems. The lead delegate said the translation was clean, which meant the Shivari signal encoding used a relatively standard structure that our suite could handle. The tone was not clean. The tone was the auditory equivalent of a closed door. I said, but I would like to hear from all parties before I respond to anyone, so that I only have to explain it once. The Shivari lead delegate said nothing. Agreement, not disagreement. Silence as evaluation. The 3 assembly delegation was 5 individuals, smaller in frame than the Shivari, and they arrived at the table with a physical data record that one of them sat down with a deliberate formal gesture that Ezra later told me was a traditional legal preamble in Threen culture, a signal that they considered this a binding proceeding and expected it to be treated accordingly. The 3 assembly notes for the record, their lead delegate said in a voice that had the particular quality of someone who has spent their entire professional life recording things for the record, that the current meeting has been convened under irregular circumstances, that the unregistered third party present has not submitted the required identification documentation, and that all proceedings are conducted under protest of the standing interim boundary agreement. Violations committed by said party noted. I said, and I appreciate the formality it helps the 3 delegates stopped. I think it was not the response they expected. The sent 2 individuals, I say individuals because that is the most accurate term I have, though it is not adequate. They did not look the way the Shivari or the 3 looked. They were difficult to describe to someone who was not there, and difficult to describe even to someone who was. They were present in the room in a way that suggested they were also present somewhere else, or several somewhere else simultaneously. Their eyes, if that is the right word, were doing something that human eyes cannot do. Ezra had warned me about this. He had said, do not focus too long on the Veloctet representatives, not because they are threatening, but because it is disorienting and you need to stay clear-headed. They had not said anything since arriving. They were waiting. I began. I am Commander Yara. Oe, I said, speaking slowly enough for Ezra to translate in near real time. I command the Earth survey vessel. Unconquered Sun, I and my crew arrived in this system by navigational accident. Our FTL drive failed during transit and deposited us here without intention or planning. I understand that our arrival occurred in the middle of a sensitive and ongoing situation. I understand that my actions since arriving, including the electromagnetic discharge that affected Shivari targeting systems, have added to that sensitivity. I am not here to deny any of that. I paused. I let Ezra's translation complete. What I am here to say is this: my ship is not a military vessel. My crew are scientists, engineers, and explorers. We have 61 people aboard. We have been trying since the moment we arrived to avoid causing harm. The actions I took were defensive and intended to allow us to position ourselves where we not be a target. I am aware that they were still actions and that actions have consequences, and I am prepared to account for that. Shivari lead delegate made a sound. The translation suite rendered it as approximately. This accounts for nothing. You disrupted military systems in a contested zone. Explain the technology used here. I had made a decision before coming in. I told the truth. The electromagnetic discharge came from our scientific survey equipment. I said it is designed to penetrate solid matter for mapping purposes. Used without calibration, it produces a broad impulse. We used it to create a window in which we could reposition without triggering an engagement response. It was an improvised solution to an immediate problem. We do not have weapons, is capable of threatening any vessel present in this system. Another pause. Another translation cycle. The three delegate picked up their formal record and made a note. The Shivari lead delegate looked at me in a way that I think meant they were reassessing. The octet remained still. Then one of the octets spoke. Low-layered complex. Ezra worked through it for almost 20 seconds. They are asking, he said quietly close to my ear, whether we know what we are. Something shifted in the room. The Shivari delegate turned toward the Velset. The Threen delegate stopped making their note. Yes, I said, addressing the Vels directly, we know what we are, or rather we have recently learned what our ancestors were and what they may have done here and why you have been waiting. I paused. I am sorry it took so long. No translation in any language would have fully captured the sound the octet made in response to that. Ezra translated it as it does not matter. You are here now. What followed was 7 hours of the most difficult conversation I have ever been part of. The Shivari Compact was right about one thing. Something existed in this system that the Quiet Ones had left behind. Not a weapon, something else. Ezra had found references to it in the octet's oldest signals, a repository, a collection, a record of everything humanity's ancient predecessors had known and learned and gathered in their time among the stars. They had not taken it with them when they went home. They had left it here in a stable orbit around a quiet star at the system's edge, sealed and waiting. The Shivari had spent 2 centuries convinced it was a weapon because their intelligence suggested any object of that significance must be a weapon. That is what their civilization built when it wanted to leave a legacy. The Veloctid had known the truth, had always known, apparently, but had not shared it, because they considered it a private matter between themselves and the species whose return they had been awaiting. The Threen Assembly had been, in this system, managing the diplomatic fallout of the other two factions. Conflict for so long that they had actually forgotten at an institutional level what the original dispute was about and had been operating on procedural momentum. All three factions had been standing at the edge of a war for 200 years because of a misunderstanding about something a species had left behind when it chose to go home and be quiet. I sat in that room, and I thought about 40 centuries of silence, and I thought about 61 people on a broken ship who had arrived here by accident, and I thought about the Veloctid's 4,000-year patience, and I made a decision. I do not have the authority to represent humanity, I said. I want to be clear about that. I am a survey commander. I am not a diplomat. I am not a head of state. I cannot sign agreements or make promises on behalf of my species. I looked at all three delegations, but I can make a proposal. And I can tell you honestly that when I return to Earth with this story, humanity will honor whatever I propose here, because we are the kind of species that pays our debts. The three delegate looked up. You have a proposal? They archive, I said. Whatever our ancestors left in this system, I propose we find it. And I propose we bring all three parties to it together and open it together. No faction claims it first. No faction has exclusive access to it. It belongs to all of you in equal measure, as much as it belongs to us. And what is inside it, whatever it is, we decide together what to do with it. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. This one had texture. In exchange, I continued. The three factions formally recognize Earth and humanity as a sovereign species, registered and independent, neutral and unaligned. We take no side in any dispute. We make no alliances. We ask for nothing except to be left in peace and to pass freely through space on our own terms. I paused in my ship and crew. Leave this system safely. That is not a negotiating point. That is a requirement. The Shavari lead delegate considered this for a very long time. The three delegate was already making notes. The Veltet looked at me with those impossible eyes and said, through Ezra's careful translation, we have been hoping for this. I know. I said, I am sorry we made you wait. On the last day before we left, the Octet sent a single escort vessel to accompany us to the FTL threshold. My name is Commander Yara Oe. I am sitting at my console writing the report that Earth Command asked for on the day we departed 17 months ago for a routine survey mission in unmapped space. The report is 17 pages. It has required 3 drafts. Not because I do not know what happened, but because I keep finding that certain things resist being reduced to the formal language of a mission debrief. Certain things need more room than a report allows, but here is what a report can carry, and here is what I am going to put in it. We found the archive on the 3rd day after the agreement. The Velocid had known its location the entire time. They had been guarding coordinates for 4,000 years and had simply been waiting for the right moment to share them. They led all 4 delegations to a point in the outer system where a small dark object moved in a slow ellipse around a dim star. Unremarkable at first sight, the kind of thing a survey pass might have logged and moved on from. We went aboard together, all 4 delegations. The Shavari, who had been expecting a weapon and found themselves in a library went very quiet in a way that I think took some of them a significant effort. The three assembly began cataloging immediately, which was I had come to understand their way of processing wonder, the velocity moved through the archive, the way a person moves through place they have visited in memory for a very long time, gently, carefully, with enormous reverence. I moved through it the way a person moves through the home of an ancestor they never knew. The archive was not exactly a physical thing, and not exactly not a physical thing. It was stored in a medium that none of our current technology fully understood, which told me that whatever the quiet ones had been before they chose to become simply human, they had been further along some paths than we have yet managed to find. There were records of science, records of biology, records of history, the history of humanity's time among the stars, which was long and complicated and included chapters that I think will take our civilization years to process fully when we bring the copies home. And there was a message, not a recording, not a transmission, something more deliberate than that, a document in a language that was older than any language currently spoken on Earth, but that our deep archive translator could, with Ezra's help, render into something we could read. It was addressed to whoever came after. It did not say, "We left you a weapon." It did not say, "We left you a war." It said in words that Ezra translated very carefully and that I read 3 times in a row in the silence room that had been waiting 4,000 years. We chose to go home because we decided that being home was more important than being large. We chose to forget because we thought the forgetting would protect you from the weight of what we had been. We were not certain we were right. We are not certain we were wrong, but we left this here so that when you found your way back, you would know that the choice was deliberate, that we loved you enough to make you small, that the stars were always yours if you wanted them. I stood in that room with the archive around me and 3 alien delegations present and my crew behind me, and I thought about every human being who had ever looked up at the sky and wondered if there was anyone else out there. There was, there had been. We had been out here before, and we had come home, and we had forgotten ourselves down to the bone and started over small, and then in the fullness of time we had found our way back to the edge of everything. I thought about Callum, who had a navigation error to his name that had changed the course of human history, and who would probably never entirely forgive himself for it, even though I intended to do my best to help him see it differently. I thought about Priya, who had built an option out of a survey emitter and 12 hours of work, and whose practical genius was the reason we had been able to move at all when moving mattered. I thought about Ezra, who had spent 18 hours in a chair pulling apart 4,000-year-old signal and had found the name the quiet ones had been given, and who had understood before any of the rest of us what it meant. I thought about the 49 other people on my crew who had been afraid, every one of them, and had done their jobs anyway, in the way that frightened people do their jobs when they have decided that something matters more than their fear. The formal agreement was signed on the 4th day. I signed for humanity, not as a diplomat, not as a head of state, but as the ranking officer present, which was all I could offer, and apparently enough. The Shivari Compact accepted registration of humanity as a sovereign, neutral species with the careful slightly stiff formality of a civilization that was adjusting its understanding of events. The Thrine Assembly produced copies for all parties and filed 3 formal acknowledgments of the proceedings. The Vel Octet witnessed in silence. When it was done, one of the Octet delegates moved toward me. I held still. Ezra, close behind me, was already translating the low signal pattern they were producing. He spoke quietly in my ear. They are asking your name, Yara Oi. I said, Commander. Unconquered Son. Ezra translated. The Octet delegate was still for a moment. Then they produced a response, a single, short signal that Ezra worked over for almost a full minute while I waited. What does it say? I asked. He looked at me, then at his translation, then back at me. It says, we will remember this name the way we remember the names of those who changed the direction of long rivers. I did not know what to say. To that, I thanked them because it was all I could think to do. We returned to the Unconquered Son. Priya had coil 2 at 82% and coil 3 at partial function, which was not the condition the drive had been in when we left Earth, but was more than sufficient to get us home. Callum had plotted the jump carefully. Twice, then a third time, then a fourth time, because Callum was going to be checking his jump calculations for the rest of his career, and I was going to let him because it was his right. The Velocit escort held position at the threshold and watched us go. We made the jump. I sat in my chair on the bridge and watched the dark of normal space give way to the tunnel light of Ada travel, and I thought about all of it. The 47 ships, the 3 factions, the 4,000 years of waiting, the archive, the message from people who had been human before humanity was the word we used. We came back from FTL in map space, 20 light years from Earth, and everything was exactly as we had left it. The stars were in their places. The radio traffic from home was faint and ordinary and full of small human concerns. Somebody on a long-range frequency was complaining about a delayed cargo delivery. Somebody else was broadcasting a music program that Callum immediately turned up louder than was strictly necessary. I wrote my report, 17 pages, 3 drafts, last line which I wrote 4 times before I was satisfied with. It reads, we came here by accident. We stayed because leaving would have left 3 civilizations at war. No additional vessels were required. Earth Command will read it. They will call meetings. There will be committees and debates, and people who are frightened and people who are elated and people who are both at once. Which is the correct response? There will be decisions to make about whether to return, about what we want our place in this galaxy to be, about what it means to be the descendants of the Quiet Ones and the inheritors of that archive. Those decisions belong to everyone. They are too large for one ship, but I know one thing that I did not know before we left. We were out there before we chose to come home, and the universe held our place. We were always going to find our way back. On the last day before we completed our final jump to Earth orbit, the Velocit escort transmitted one final signal. Ezra translated it slowly, reading it aloud on the bridge for everyone to hear. The message was 6 seconds long. The translation was 8 words. The Quiet Ones were never quiet. They were patient. Callum turned the music back up. I brought us home.